Here we go. All right, well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to speak here. It's great to be able to talk about something I'm really interested in front of such a big audience. The talks we've had so far have been talking about specific projects focusing on a specific type of technology. And I'm really going to be talking very broadly about a range of technologies on a specific topic, and that is biological recording. So when I'm talking about biological recording, I'm talking about citizen science, voluntary participation in recording, sorts of things that most of us in this room do. And I work at the Biological Records Centre at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and we coordinate lots of this sort of thing. We help schemes setting up their data collection protocols, help them with analysing data, managing their websites, that sort of thing. So that's my background in this area. And my particular interest is in the roles of technology, both in data collection, as we've seen from the previous talks, but also in data analysis and data dissemination. So I'm going to talk briefly about what I mean by biological recording in citizen science, talk a little bit about the rise of electronic technologies, what really we're focusing on here today. And then I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about these three different sections. So data collection, like the methods we've already seen, ensuring data quality, which is quite a big issue when we're talking about mass participation in data collection, how this data is used, and where we might go next. So I was quite pleased when I was invited to do this talk, when I went away to look at the most recent edition of the White Admiral publication of the Society, to see two articles talking about technology, social media, and online recording. So I'm sure you've all read this and you're all on my side already, so that's fantastic. So citizen science is a term that we hear more and more these days, and I'll probably use it interchangeably with volunteer recording throughout my talk. So I thought it'd be good just to briefly talk about what I mean by citizen science. My ideal citizen science is a combination of excellent engagement and real science. So by excellent engagement, I mean engaging effectively with the public, getting the public on board, engaged in a project, and keeping them engaged throughout the project and all the way to its conclusion. And here's a picture of the Biological Records Centre when we had a stall up in Gardeners World Live, where we were talking to gardeners about how they might encourage pollinators into their garden. And by real science, I've put up a picture here of a guy in lab specs and a lab coat. That's often the public perception of a scientist. Obviously, most of us aren't like that. We have far more facial hair than that. And by real science, I mean collecting data which is valuable. We can ask questions with the data. We can create answers which are useful in conservation or in policy. So citizen science is not new. Citizen science is a term that we hear banded around a lot now, but it's been around for centuries. Darwin was arguably a citizen scientist. And this is how we generally used to do it. Many people in this room have probably used these sorts of forms. You fill in the species you saw, where you saw it, the date you saw it, and you mail it into your county recorder, your local record centre, and it gets added to the database. We end up with lovely publications like this, floras. If only they all looked as beautiful as this on their front pages now. Floras of where all the plants are in a county over a certain time period. Absolutely fantastic. Technology and technology's role in citizen science isn't new either. We've heard mention of binoculars, but going back even further, we can think about when microscopes first arrived on the scene in the 1600s. And I've just taken Hook here as an example, and Hook wrote this book, The Micrographia, which is really the first extensive use of microscopes and publications of drawings from microscopes. And he's famous for his drawings of fleas, where he identified the hairs on the surface. And also he coined the term cells when looking at cork bark under a microscope. So technology has through history, had an important role in biological recording. But really what we're talking about here is the rise of computerization and the internet. So I went away last week and picked some numbers off the internet, looking at the proportion of the world's population that had internet access. That's the blue line. So you can see it starts in around 1995. And by the time we get to the end of this timeline, around last year, we've got about 40% of the global population has access to the internet. And then the red line is the proportion of smartphones proportion of phones in the UK, mobile phones, which are smartphones. So smartphones only really came on the market in sort of around 2004, and they're already over 50%, and this data is a couple years old. Out of interest, can I get a show of hands of people who have a smartphone on them? So we're talking about 60, 70% in this audience. So smartphones, I'm going to talk here now about data collection, about hardware, and you're probably all expecting me to jump straight to smartphones, but I'm not going to talk about smartphones for like the next 15 minutes, because I think we often jump straight there and we start talking about apps and all this wonderful stuff. But there's so much other hardware out there that's of interest. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about all the other stuff that we have. So digital cameras. We've already had a talk talking about camera traps. Digital cameras have probably been around, well, they're one of the longest, of the hardware I'm going to talk about, they're the one that's been around for the longest. So digital cameras allow us to have a permanent record of what we saw. So in the past, if you have a record coming in of a badger, you can't be 100% sure that they saw a badger. But if that record comes in with a photograph, then you can go away and verify that is exactly what they saw. And obviously that's quite important with species that are quite hard to identify. So one bit of technology that's made good use of this is iSpot. So for those who don't know, iSpot is a website where you can go on and you can submit a photo. You submit a photo, and there's a community of users on this website who can then view your photo and give an identification for what you've seen. So if you don't know what it is, you can post it on there and say, I don't know what this is. And you can get a response sometimes within a minute of someone saying, oh, I think it's this. So it's a great way of crowdsourcing identification. So we're going out to the crowd and we're asking the crowd, does anyone know what this is? It's also a great way to collect a data set of photos of organisms. So you can go back and if you have a photograph of a species, you can view all the other photographs on the website that are of that same species and see if you've got your identification right. And it's a great place just to go and share photos just because you like to, because most of us just take photos just because we like to, right? So it's quite good for that too. So GPS. GPS is so as cameras have revolutionized our ability to verify what we saw, GPS has revolutionized our ability to confirm where we are. So we can have known accuracy of location data associated with sightings. It's easy to go back to locations you've been to before. If you're trying to find your camera trap that you put out in Panama, you can find your way back to it relatively easily. And GPS has been implemented in a number of other technologies as well. So used in combination with cameras, for example, so high-end digital SLR cameras. Some of them now have GPS technologies in them. And the technology I'm going to pick up here is Treezilla. Treezilla is quite an ambitious project to go out and map every tree in an urban environment in the UK. It's pretty ambitious. And this is a little snapshot of an area of London around Victoria Station. And you can see that someone's gone out here, just a volunteer has gone out and recorded with their phone and the GPS on their phone the location of every tree in that area and what species it is. You can see I've clicked on one of the dots here and it's telling me a bit more information about that tree. And from this, we can get information about how much CO2 they capture, how valuable they are as an ecosystem service, this sort of thing. This is really a public engagement tool to make people aware of how valuable trees are around them. I want to talk a little bit about technology hacking. And by hacking here, I don't mean anything illegal. I mean simply you're repurposing a technology for something other than that for which it was designed. And this is something we've seen cropping up in the last sort of 5-6 years. So, and it's probably best if I give you some examples. This top left picture, you might be able to see it at the back, but on the left-hand side, we've got a webcam. So someone's just taken the case of a webcam, and that's what you're seeing. In his fingers, he's holding the lens that he's taken out. On the back of this lens is an infrared filter. This gets rid of infrared light, because for most photographs we take, we don't want infrared light. You can take that off, and then you can put a blue filter, which is this picture on the right, on the front. And by doing that, you've created a photosynthesis sensor. So the light we're now recording in our webcam, which we bought for £6 off eBay, is now telling us about photosynthesis. So the picture on the left is what you get from that camera, if you just to view it once it's come in. We can then perform some fancy metrics on it, and we convert it into a new color range, and we can see areas of high photosynthesis in the hot colors, whites and reds, and areas with low photosynthesis in the blacks and greens and blues. And just for novelty, they've strapped it to a kite, which is why it's an aerial photo. So that can all be done for £6 buying a webcam off eBay. There's another cool thing, sticking with webcams. If you take the lens out and turn it the other way around and stick it back in, you can create a microscope. So that's what these three pictures here on the right are. So that could be useful for identification of hard-to-ID species, for example. And bottom right, this is quite a nice project. This is a community action project. So the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, there was a community that felt that the local government weren't responding effectively to the oil that was washing up in the coast in Florida. So they took a digital camera and they strapped it to a kite, attached it to the back of a boat, and drove up their estuary. And what they created was these pictures in the middle. So the gray is just a normal satellite image, which is very low resolution. And then the color is the photographs that they took. And this is very high resolution. I haven't got the high resolution image here, but you could zoom right in on this picture and see very clearly the oil that's inside this estuary. And then they took this to the local government, and the government responded and started a cleanup operation. So this is just citizens, just normal, regular people, harnessing technology to answer a question, and then they're getting policy action. I think it's a great example of how we can harness technologies. But this isn't new. This is one of my favorite photographs of all time. This is a photograph called The Ruins of San Francisco. The negative that this photograph is from is 2 foot high and 4 foot wide. It's an incredibly high resolution picture. You can imagine the size of camera that must have been in. This picture is taken from 1,000 feet, dangling from a kite in 1906. The same year as that first camera trap photo. Good year for photography, obviously. So absolutely outstanding. And this was done, so over 100 years ago. So again, it's not new. So sound analysis. There might be some sound playing in the background of this slide. This is a yellow hammer on the top left, and this is the yellow hammer that we can hear in the background. So this is a cool project where they've got citizen scientists, participants, volunteers, to go out and record yellow hammers on their smartphones. And once you've recorded it, you then hit a button and it gets sent off up to the central database. And once it's there, it's then compared to all the other sound recordings that they've got. And they can start to find differences in the calls these birds are making in different places. So just as we have Scousers and East Londoners with different dialects, the same occurs with yellowhammers. And this picture in the bottom right is from the project's results in the Czech Republic. There are different colors here showing you the different dialects of these birds. Really cool project. And this is also being done in the UK and New Zealand as well. We can do atmospheric recording. So this tool, this little device on the right, in the top right corner, this has a mobile phone inside of it, or the electronics of a mobile phone inside it, as well as a pollution sensor. So it's recording measurements of different pollutants in the air, and it's sending them automatically through the mobile network back to some home base. And what they've done is they've stuck these to street sweepers in San Francisco. So the idea is street sweepers go all over the city. So you can get recordings from all over the city, and then you can plot them on a map. So we've got light green here is low pollution, and reds are high pollution. So you can see the sweepers moving around the city. And you can identify hotspots of pollution, and then you can act upon that and try and reduce pollution in those areas. So while this was done on street sweepers, they've also, in other areas, in Ghana, for example, they're encouraging members of the public to go out with these. They're giving them these sensors and encouraging them to go out and record pollution in cities and where they are. How about recording earthquakes? So in the bottom left-hand corner here, we've got a seismometer, which costs you about $25. You send a request into this research team, and they'll send you the seismometer. You plug it into your laptop or your computer or whatever, and it sits on your desk and records. And I've got a map here of all the people who are using them. I think there's two different types. That's why I've got laptops and USB keys, but all of those are sensors. And then when I captured this, these earthquake symbols, there's a gap here. These earthquake symbols are showing you earthquakes that were recorded in the last 4 hours from this recorder network. So the idea is that this acts as a tool for researchers to learn more about how earthquakes propagate, how the waves propagate, Also, it could eventually be used as an early warning system. So you could potentially alert people when these things pick up the waves. And obviously, they're not as sensitive as the proper bits of kit, which are being used by the experts. But they're good nonetheless. And in fact, in areas where this research team is particularly interested in earthquakes, like San Andreas Fault, you can get these for free. So you just send a request and they'll send you one for free. Right, smartphones. So smartphones do a lot of what I've already talked about. So smartphones have GPS. They have cameras. They have sort of accelerometers and a gyroscope, which would be good for vibrations. They have a compass. They have a microphone for recording sounds. So smartphones are the platform of choice when it comes to this sort of mass participation technology in science. I also think smartphones are a bit of a misnomer because they're not really phones, are they? They're computers which happen to make phone calls. So extremely powerful. And I'm going to focus on one project that's used smartphones, the Conquer Tree Science Project. And hands up, complete bias, this was run by my organization. So that's why I'm going to talk about it. But I think it's a really good exemplar of how citizen science can harness technology effectively. So this is an app. Anyone can download it onto their smartphone. In the app, it asks you to go and find a horse chestnut tree. So we're interested in the horse chestnut leaf miner. So this has arrived in the UK in around 2002, I think it was, and it's spread and it causes a lot of damage to horse chestnut trees. The leaf miner causes the leaves to turn brown. So the app asks you to go out and find a horse chestnut tree, where you are, and to record the level of damage to the leaves on a scale of sort of 1 to 5. And then the app knows, obviously, when you've recorded it, knows exactly where you are because it's got your GPS from your phone, it knows who you are, so we can get back in touch if we have a query, and it's got your recording of how damaged the leaf is. And the scientists who did this project were able to show, this sort of graph here is showing that after 3 years, after the leaf miner has arrived in an area, within 3 years, it causes the maximum amount of damage. It gets to its, like, the maximum damage that they're going to cause the tree. So it takes that 3 years to sort of establish in an area. And that's a really interesting and important finding. They also had a follow-on project with school kids where they got them to take the leaves and put the leaves in sealed bags and then see what emerged. The idea was, are you going to see the adult emerge of the larvae or the adult of a parasitoid that has laid its eggs on the larvae? The idea being that perhaps if loads of parasitoids end up emerging, we can say that the invasion is going to be controlled by the parasitoids that we already have here. And that wasn't the case. So the parasitoids aren't controlling the spread of this insect. And so we had a well-defined question. We had a smartphone app which allowed the public to go out and collect the data, and then we could use that to test hypotheses, get answers. And this was published in a really high-impact journal. So we can do really good science from this data collected from the general public. So the main conclusions, smartphones rule supreme because they have all this technology in one and there's a pocket computer effectively. This range of hardware that's available means we can get a large quantity of data because we can all go out there and collect data now. We also get a large diversity of data because we can collect photos or sounds or quake sensors and all this sort of stuff. It's really open for participation. So anyone, as long as you have a smartphone, can go out and record. Anyone can go out and log onto a website and submit what they've seen. And there's a good stand on the other side there which is talking about how you can go and do that yourselves through the Suffolk Record Centre. And for a lot of these things, there's no prior knowledge necessary. So, for example, the Ladybird app, it has a key in there, so you can take your photo and you can compare your photo to photos of other species and try and figure out which one it is. So there's less prior knowledge needed to participate. So I'm going to anticipate the question, or what everyone's thinking, is that, well, if everyone can participate and you don't require any knowledge, and is this data any good? Because you've just got numpties recording anything. So I wanted to address that a little bit and how we're trying to use technology to ensure that we have good data quality. So first of all, standardization. So in my day job, I do a lot of time analyzing data. And I get really annoyed when data isn't standardized. So for example, in the sort of records that we have coming in, you might have species names spelt differently. So Dorbenton, you can have one I or two. Dates coming in, and I swear we get dates coming in like this with Roman numerals. And my colleagues spent 2 weeks writing an R program which will convert Roman numerals into actual years. So incredibly frustrating. Location information can come in a grid reference, was that the Irish grid reference or the English grid reference, easting, northing, latitude and longitude, but then what projection have you used for that? Place names, absolute nightmare. My garden, So with forms, we can get around all this because we can have dates coming in a standard format. We can have locations coming in a standard format. You click on a map to say where it is that you were. You can submit photos. You can choose names. Species names come from a predefined list. So that's fantastic. That's a really good way we can increase the quality of data that's coming in terms of quality for analysis. Computers can do some stuff too to help us with the quality. So the NBN has developed the record cleaner. So we know some stuff about species. We know roughly where they're found in the UK and when they should be out and about. So we can highlight records that come in that don't fit into what we think. So, for example, if a red deer comes in recorded in the middle of the Red Sea, we can say, well, maybe that wasn't a red deer. Maybe that was something else. Or if we have a common blue being recorded in the depths of winter, we might say, well, maybe it wasn't flying around at that point. Are you sure that's what it was? I talked a bit about photographs earlier. Something like iSpot. So iRecord is another service where you can go on and you can submit records, and you can submit photographs with your records, and these can then be verified by experts, so they'll look at these photos and verify them. But not all taxa are the same, so not one tool is going to fix everything for all taxa. For example, butterflies, here, the biggest wedge here is black, and that means that the majority of species can be reliably identified from a photograph. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got spiders here. The palest section is saying we need a national expert in spiders to identify this proportion of species. And the next biggest wedge is we need a known recorder or an expert, a fairly good expert, to review it to be sure of its identification. And only a very, very small wedge can be identified from a photograph. So computers can do, and technology can do some stuff, like we can have a verifying system for butterflies and photos. That clearly isn't going to work for spiders. And this really is just echoing that, talking about expert validation. So we can have pools of photographs of our records, and we can link experts into these and use their expert knowledge to help validate these records that are coming in. Also, things like iSpot has keys, so that you can go through an easy-to-use key that a member of the public might be able to follow and try and identify your species that way. So there's also an element of educating as well, so educating the recorders to more effectively ID their species. So a little bit there about how we can improve data quality. So domain expertise is essential. We need the experts to help know what the tools can do to validate our results and to tell us what sort of valid conclusions we can draw from them. Computers can help in certain instances. We can crowdsource knowledge, so we can put photographs out there and ask the community to help us to ID them. And the high-quality data that we get out at the end is incredibly valuable. I'm going to be talking about that now when I talk about how we can use this data. So the sort of work that I do is I sort of do bits and bobs at all different stages, but the majority of my work is focused on working with the data once we have it. And one thing you can do is create species distribution models. So we can say, if we've recorded this species in these locations, we can deduce from that the sort of climate, the sort of habitat that it likes, and then we can then project back onto a map saying, okay, if it likes this sort of habitat and this sort of climate, then it should be in this sort of area. So I just did a search on the internet for publications using citizen science data for species distribution models, and this was the top hit. And this is a project in Turkey where they've used data collected by volunteers on songbirds. And this map here is showing, using these species distribution models, the species richness of songbirds throughout Turkey. So red areas where we think we've got the most species, and blue areas, dark blue areas where we think we have the fewest. And then they've also used our knowledge of how climate's going to change in the future to map the relative increases or decreases in the number of songbirds we'd expect in 3 time points in the future. So red areas where we might expect increased number of species, blue areas where we might expect fewer. So this is really valuable for thinking about conservation, areas we might want to conserve in the future, and the impacts of climate change. This is some analyses that I've done along with colleagues at the Biological Record Centre, where we're looking for trends in species over time. So that previous slide was talking about distribution in space. Here I'm talking about trends over time in abundance or occurrence. And we've taken the data that we hold at the Biological Record Centre and looking at taxa, so each sort of row here is a taxonomic group, and we've got the proportion of species that fall into various categories of increase and decline. So if you've got big green bars, that means the largest proportion of your species in that taxa are increasing. If you've got big red bars, it means a large proportion declining. And this data fed into the State of Nature report, which hopefully the government's going to take some heed of. So we're using this data to hopefully inform some policy. Some of these things are because we have very low, so millipedes, for example, is one which has the big green bars. We have very low number of species. So we might get some slightly skewed results. And again, that's where the experts come in. So when we generate these results, we often go back to the experts and say, does this make sense? And they can say, no, it doesn't. And we can go away and try and review our methods. So the internet can unite all of us. If you're particularly interested in a specific taxa, but there's no local group where you are, there's no one interested in that taxa where you are, you can go online and you can find communities out there who are interested in what you're interested in. And Scratchpads is a good example of that. So Scratchpads is a sort of toolkit for creating websites. And they're aimed at sort of biological recording. So you might have, so we've got some just examples here of various websites you can set up using this technology. And you can have forums on there so you can talk to each other about the sorts of things you're up to. You can have pages about each species with some information, so gathering information from your community about these species, organized trips, this sort of thing. So it's a really valuable way of getting people together online to share in their enthusiasm for what they do and share in their knowledge. So eBird, smartphones rule supreme as hardware. I think eBird probably rules supreme as a sort of citizen science project. So it's a bit like BirdTrack, if you're familiar with that. You go out and you can submit your recordings to this website, and it will show you all the bird records across the world. It was started in the US, so that's where it has its biggest audience, but it's in the UK as well. And here we can get instant access to information generated from the data. So most of the stuff I've been talking about so far is sort of a one-way channel. Data is collected and gets funneled off to scientists who do stuff with it. And this is sort of trying to complete that cycle. So we've got data going in from its users, and now we've got information coming back to those users too. So I can go on and I could look at, if I was a very keen birder and had lots of records like this guy on the left, I can go in and I can look at all my species and I can see how abundant they've been across time. I could look at 3 different species I've been recording in my patch and see how they're changing in abundance relative to each other. Or I can go and look at a species distribution map of a species I'm interested in, which has been updated from the records that were added this morning. So this is really valuable. I think we're seeing more of this now, where we're seeing tools developed by the custodians of data to allow data contributors to access information. I think this is a really good thing. And this is a quote from a chap at eBird about how if you can give this sort of feedback instantly, it's really motivating for the people who are using the tools. This is a little fun example of what can be done. Fraxinus is a game on Facebook. So they're sort of harnessing social media. They're also harnessing something that we do extremely well that computers are extremely bad at, and that's pattern recognition. That's why when you sign up for a website, you have those little funny pictures. You have to decode the letters that are in them, and they're always really hard. They're sort of all wavy and have lines going through them. So computers are really bad at picking out letters from those sorts of things, and we're really good at it. So what we're trying to do in this game is these 3 lines underneath, we're trying to align them with that top line and with the black background. And Fraxinus is it's to do with ash dieback. And what we're doing is we're looking at the genetics of the trees. So each one of these lines is actually a genetic sequence made to look pretty. And we're trying to align them to a reference sequence. And this is something that's very hard to do. And in a past life, I had to do a lot of this when looking at viruses and bats. It's very laborious trying to go through and pick it out. But then you look at things like Bejeweled and Candy Crush Saga games on smartphones, which are all to do with this sort of pattern recognition, and they're really good fun. So these guys thought, well, why don't we just turn it into a game? And then everyone will think they're having fun, but in fact they're doing the really hard work we don't want to have to do. And this was fantastic. It got in the press, and it really, really boomed, and they got tons of really valuable data out of it. That's sort of really a little aside, but this is a field called gamification, or turning things into games, because we love playing games. So this is just coming back to that point I made a bit earlier about the interaction between scientists and volunteers. I think we have two types of interaction that go on at the moment. The top one is public engagement, which is maybe what I'm doing now, where I'm selecting the information I'm telling you. Then we have current citizen science, which is very much I'm prescribing to the public the data I would like them to collect. But what I think we'd like to see is a move to a more dynamic scenario where people can choose what they record, and they can feed back to the sort of scheme organizers what they'd like to record, or ask questions of their own data themselves. And so the line between who is a scientist or the organizer and who is the recorder volunteer sort of become a bit more blurred, and that people in the public can sort of answer their own scientific questions. And you might think, well, this is lunacy. That's not ever going to happen. But we've already seen elements of it occurring. So the NBN gateway, where a lot of the biological records made in the UK end up, they've launched a new gateway about 3 months ago, which crashed a lot to start with, but it's a lot better, I'm told. You can go on here, and you could look up a plant species you're interested in, and you can look at it for 2 different time periods, which I have here. The earlier time period is in blue, and the later time period is in orange. And I might say, oh, that's interesting. In my square, it was recorded 20, 30 years ago, but hasn't been recorded anymore. And then I could go out and I can do my own little experiment. I can go out and I can do some recording, and I could find it there. And I've answered a question. So I've sort of done my own science by using the data and the tools that have been provided to me. Another really good example, and this is really the only rigorous example I can find, is Zooniverse. So Zooniverse is a website, and it hosts astrological or astronomological citizen science projects. And the one it was famous for, the very first project it did, called Galaxy Zoo, was it had loads of photographs. You went on there and you were presented with a photograph, and you had to click on it where you saw a galaxy. So again, we're harnessing pattern recognition. Next photo, galaxies. Next photo, galaxies. So you're doing something which is very difficult for computers to do. And as you do this, you're getting points. And you're getting more points than your mate who hasn't recorded many. So it becomes a game. And this has really taken off. And then lots of other people have then gone to Zooniverse and say, oh, can you host our citizen science projects? You have loads of volunteers, and they really like you. So what we see here is a timeline, Galaxy Zoo at the far left, and then all these other citizen science projects that they've taken on as time's gone by. And the line shows you the number of people they have registered on their website. And it's up to 750,000 at the end there. Something really interesting happened. There was a certain type of galaxy that the physicists weren't interested in, and it appears as like a mushy pea on these photographs. And a couple of people saw them and posted in the forum, oh, look, there's these mushy pea type things. They're not in the list of galaxies we're supposed to identify, but they're there, and aren't they interesting? And the site admin said, oh yeah, they're so-and-so, so-and-so, we're not really interested in them, just ignore them. And they said, no, we're not going to ignore them. They set up their own little group, their own forum, and everyone in this group went out and recorded these green mushy peas. And everywhere, all over. So it had this great data set, and 2 or 3 years later, they published a paper on it. So they decided what they were going to look at, and they ignored what the scientists want them to do, and they went off and they did it themselves. And they had a paper to show for it. So it can be done. Also, another interesting thing about this website is it became self-sustaining. So if someone had a question about this galaxy identification thing and they posted it in the forum, it wasn't the site admin that got back to them first. It was another person on the website, another volunteer. And so it became self-sustaining. The site admin wasn't really needed anymore. The scientists that were organizing weren't really needed anymore. It all just became self-sustaining. And I'd love to see more of this in the future. So a couple of conclusions here. The volunteer-collected data is valuable. I hope that was apparent from the sort of species distribution modeling and the trends analysis stuff I showed you. Feedback's becoming more of a priority, like eBird, for example, because we see it as a way to motivate recorders. And hopefully we're moving away from this whole idea of the citizen and the scientist to a citizen scientist who can go out and answer their own questions. So a few overall conclusions. We have this huge range of data, lots of data, and diverse. Fewer barriers to participation. Experts are still essential throughout this whole process. And we see an empowering of citizen scientists. They can go out and record what they want to, become more engaged in the scientific process. And I've been very positive throughout this talk. I think I'm quite a positive person, but there's obviously some warnings to take home too. There's currently too much choice. There's a lot of citizen science projects out there that you can get involved in. Who are you going to submit your records to? Well, there's no certification at present. There's no label. The MBN Gateway doesn't stamp a product and say, yeah, this is a really good tool to use. So we have a problem there, and hopefully we'll arrive at a solution to that soon. Data silos. So this is where you send all your data off, and then it goes into a pot, and then no one can get access to it. And we all know that has happened in the past. And you'd think that this technology and these open MBN Gateway would be a solution to that. But it's not always the case. They can become data silos themselves. So it's really important to make sure that this data that we're collecting that we might want to be free and open is free and open to access. And then at the end here, I've put marginalization of traditionalists. Lots of people, as we've seen at the beginning, about 40% of people here don't have smartphones. Some people don't like using computers. They don't want to go onto the website and everything. They're quite happy sending in their recording cards that they have done for the last 30, 40 years. That works well. It isn't broke, so why fix it? Okay? And they're often the experts, and we don't want to annoy them. So I think it's really important that we bear this in mind when we're developing technologies, and don't just gallivant away and think that having smartphone apps will solve everything. We need to include people who don't want to use this sort of technology, and ensure they're still included in the process. I also wanted to end on another cautionary note. There's this wonderful thing in technology called the hype cycle, and it's developed in the States, which is why it has these slightly dubious headings for the different parts of it. But essentially, it charts the hype around technologies. So you start off on the left here with a technology being born, and what we've got here, 3D bioprinting they've got down there, human augmentation, quantum computing. And then everyone realizes this technology is available, and like, this is amazing, it's going to solve all of our problems. So it gets right up to the top of this hype tree. So we've got 3D printings up there on this example. I think we put citizen science up there too, maybe. And then it comes over and it crashes because you realize it's not going to do what you all thought it was going to do. Like speech recognition software, when it first came out, was absolutely hopeless. We all thought it was going to be great, and it crashed. And so we enter the trough of disillusionment. But don't worry, we gradually go up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity, so we'll be fine. And at the end here, this is now where we have speech recognition now. So it's at the end here, things like Siri on your Apple smartphone, which you can ask it where the nearest Chinese restaurant is, and it gives you directions there within a couple of seconds. So what I'd like to see is us not overhyping what technology and citizen science can do, and just seeing more of a sort of nice plateau. No trough of disillusionment, please. So I'd just like to say thanks to you guys for listening. Thanks to Michael, Nick, and David, who've provided many useful discussions on this topic. You can find me on Twitter if you're a techno person, or you can get me by email. And I'll be around all day. Thank you very much.
Very good indeed. Thanks for the time.